You have candidates like Zohran Mamdani, who's running for mayor of New York and making anti-Zionism a central plank of his platform. Excuse me? I thought mayors deal with sanitation and potholes. No, anti-Zionism.
My guest today is Dr. Daniel Pipes, founder of the Middle East Forum and one of America's leading scholars of the modern Middle East. For nearly 50 years, he's challenged conventional wisdom about Israel, Islam, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Today, we're putting his biggest ideas to the test. Dr. Pipes, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Dr. Pipes, you've said that your three most significant original contributions regarding Israel are your ideas about Jerusalem, Israel being purchased rather than conquered, and Israel victory. Let's begin with Jerusalem. How did you arrive at the conclusion that Jerusalem only becomes politically important to Muslims when they no longer control it? And what's the strongest historical evidence for that claim?
Well, you mentioned I'm a historian of the modern Middle East, but I've got a PhD in medieval Islamic history. And so my PhD thesis and first book were on the 7th and 8th centuries. And with that familiarity, I came to notice that time and again, in fact, over 6 cycles, Muslim interest in the city of Jerusalem was high when it was not there and went low when it was theirs, over and over and over again, from the time of Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, till the loss of Jerusalem in 1967. So just to take the last example, so long as the Jordanians controlled it from 1949 to 1967, they had no interest. The Jordanian radio broadcast the Friday sermons from Amman, not from Jerusalem. Jerusalem didn't have investment. Jerusalem was a small town of no particular significance. Only when the Israelis got it in 1967, took control, did not only Jordan, but the great Muslim world took interest in it. So this has been a feature of Islamic life. The real focus of Islamic concern, of course, are Mecca and Medina. Jerusalem has never been a central concern, except when someone else, be it Crusaders, be it Israelis, be it the British or others, control it.
Mm-hmm. Now, has anything since October 7th strengthened or challenged that thesis?
I don't think there's any particular difference since October 7th. The Iranians picked it up. They have the Quds Brigade. Quds is the Arabic term for Jerusalem. They have the Quds Brigade, which is their international aggressive force. The Turks have picked it up, and so forth. No particular change. What is interesting is that given this heightened interest in Jerusalem, that Israel has options that it has not availed itself of. In other words, there are a number of regimes and the PLO that want to control Jerusalem. And I've argued to the Israelis that they should, in a sense, auction off, not control Jerusalem as a city, but control of the Islamic sanctities in Jerusalem. Right now, it's the PLO, or Palestinian Authority, that controls them, with some role for the Jordanians. The Turks also want a part of this. The Saudis want a part of this. The Moroccans want a part of it. My particular idea is that the Israelis should talk to Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and say, what would you like? What would you do for us in return for our giving you control of Al-Aqsa and the other sanctities in Jerusalem? What are you willing to give us for it? I think they might get a pretty good price.
Mm-hmm. Now, your second major idea is that Israel was largely purchased rather than conquered. Why is that distinction so important, and what's the strongest historical evidence supporting that?
Not largely purchased. Until 1948, entirely purchased. The coming into existence of the Israeli state was 100% due to purchases. There was no violence involved. The Zionists could not deploy violence for the simple reason that there was first the Ottoman Empire and then the British Empire, who controlled the land, and it would have been futile. And there were skirmishes here and there, but there was no attempt to seize land in order to control it and take advantage of it. Everything that the Zionists got from the 1880s on, for some 65 years was purchased. And there were institutions for purchasing. I would argue that there's no other country in the world that was purchased. I mean, I'm in the United States right now. The United States was, the Louisiana Purchase and the like. But the United States came into being through force. And the same applies to every other country. Only in the case of Israel was it purchased. This is ironic and dramatic because Israel is the country that keeps on being accused of stealing the land. No, everyone else stole the land, as it were. The Israelis purchased it. It's ironic, and it's a tool the Israelis could avail themselves of again, but they don't.
And that was actually my next question. Why is it that this stolen land narrative becomes so dominant when you're speaking about Israel?
Well, it's an effective argument. It's worked wonders for the anti-Israel team, but the Israelis have never been adept at Hasbara, as they call it, as making their case. For example, the refugee issue. The Israelis had a very powerful tool at their disposal, which was the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Jews who were thrown out of their countries. Syria, Yemen, Egypt, Morocco, so forth, never really took advantage of it. And so it seems like it's a one-sided refugee problem, whereas in fact it's a two-sided refugee problem. And one side, namely the Israeli side, integrated its refugees who became full citizens and active participants in the economic and public life of the state. And the other side held its refugees in amber. And now, 80 years later, still wants to exploit their misery in order to make a political point. Israelis don't take advantage, don't make that argument.
Mm-hmm.
Israelis have always been better at doing things than arguing.
Mm-hmm. Let's turn to your best known idea, which is Israel victory. For viewers hearing that phrase for the first time, what does it actually mean?
Well, it's striking to note that the Israeli goal in its fighting and its arguing with the Palestinians is to manage the problem, is to deal with the ongoing conflict, but not resolve it. There's no attempt to resolve it. And I'm arguing that wars only end when one side gives up, and that the Israeli goal should be to get the Palestinians to give up. And while that might seem futile, given the decades and decades of Palestinian fervor and violence, I think there are plenty of signs that many Palestinians have had enough. And many Palestinians are ready to come to terms with Israel. But Israel doesn't have this goal of victory, has the goal of management, of dealing with the issue, not resolving it. So I wrote a book on the subject, came out in 2024, called Israel Victory, and it just is appearing now in Hebrew in Israel in July 2026.
Did October 7th strengthen your confidence in Israel victory or force you to rethink it?
Initially, in the first 3 weeks in October 2023, let me start by saying that I submitted the manuscript on the 30th of September, precisely a week before October 7th. And then October 7th happened, and the Israelis were so strong. And my feeling was, who needs my book? The Israelis have all decided on victory. They're talking about it all the time. And while that continued, for example, Prime Minister Netanyahu mentioned it hundreds of times. In fact, the steam went out, and now, close to 3 years later, there's no sense of Israel victory whatsoever. It's all about some ridiculous board of peace, and all about yellow lines, and who knows all the details. But the idea of victory is essentially defunct for the moment. It'll take a different leadership, a different moment, to see the notion of victory perhaps be taken up.
Now, you later introduced the phrase victory deferred. What changed your thinking?
Well, what I just mentioned, that the moment has passed. 3 years ago, there was an intense feeling in Israel that enough, we have to resolve this. But that dissipated. And in large part, it dissipated because of the campaign to redeem the hostages. There was a contradiction. You can't have a victory over Hamas. You can't destroy Hamas at the same time that you're negotiating with Hamas. And ultimately, the drive to negotiate and to redeem hostages, bring them home, was stronger than the drive for victory. And so victory is put aside. So maybe someday it'll come back. But it's pretty defunct right at this moment.
Do you believe that Israel lost the Gaza war?
Oh, yes, entirely. Disaster. Disaster. Great reluctance. What the Israelis tend to do is focus on tactical victories. Yeah, okay. They flush this tunnel. They won some other battle. But that's not what counts. What counts is the overall picture. Israel's status in the world has gone way down. Hamas remains in power. I mean, there's a certain parallel. Hamas remains in power in Gaza in the way that the Islamic Republic of Iran remains in power in Iran. You can smash them, but Israel lost the Gaza war and the United States lost the Iran war, at least at this moment. It has lost it. Perhaps it can redeem it, but no, it was a disaster for Israel. The striking contrast is between Israel vis-a-vis the Arab states, where it did brilliantly, 1948, 1956, 1967, 1970, 1973, 1982, brilliantly. In 1982, the Israelis destroyed, I forget, 82 aircraft, something like that, Syrian aircraft. No Israeli aircraft were lost. 1967 is arguably the greatest military victory in human history. Astonishing victories that the Israelis achieved over the Arab-speaking states. But when it comes to the Palestinians, the Israelis have just met disaster after disaster, the worst of which was after October 7th. Just unable to figure out how to deal with the Palestinians. Bringing the tools that work so well against the states, against an institution like the PLO or Hamas, and those tools don't work.
Yeah. Let's say you were Prime Minister of Israel. What would you have done differently October 8th, 2023?
Well, in the first place, I'd have been paying a whole lot more attention to Hamas before October 7th. It was criminal the way the Israeli security establishment ignored the threat of Hamas. The Israeli security establishment convinced itself that Hamas had become a tame organization that was interested in economic development and the like. That would have been the first thing. But supposing I'd become Prime Minister on October 8th, I would have had a very clear goal of eliminating Hamas as an organization. I would have paid the price politically for ignoring the appeals to bring back the hostages. I would have said, it's a tragedy what has happened to them, but I'm not going to inflict more tragedies on Israelis in order to bring them out. I mean, the lives of the hostages are not worth more than the lives of the soldiers who will be killed to redeem them. We're going to focus on eliminating Hamas. We're going to do it carefully. We're going to do it strategically. We're going to pay attention to world opinion. We're going to do this in such a way that we don't cause outrage around the world, which, in fact, the Israelis did cause. If terms like genocide are bandied about, we're going to do this in a clever way. We're going to do this in a smart way. We're going to do this in a protracted way. Could have been done, I think, very differently, but it was, as I say, a disaster.
Mm-hmm. Now, you argue that wars end only when one side gives up its objective. What would genuine Palestinian defeat actually look like, not just militarily, but psychologically?
Yeah, it goes beyond violence. It goes to accepting Israel as a Jewish state. I think there are many Palestinians. Polls show this, voting shows this, anecdotes show this, people voting with their feet shows this. I mean, a lot of Palestinians want to go into Israel for various different reasons, some economic, some political, some related to their sexual identities and so forth. All sorts of reasons. You have lots of Palestinians who want to live in Israel. You have articulate spokesmen who say, Israel is a decent state. Yeah, I'd much rather be there than living under Hamas or the Palestinian Authority. The Israelis tend to ignore this. The Israelis tend to pay more attention to what's happening, for example, here in the United States and public opinion, which is, of course, important. But they don't pay attention to the Palestinians. So, for example, the Israelis have what they call security prisoners, Palestinians who are in jail, in prison for political-related offenses. These are individuals who are 100% under their control. And yet, it's well known that the prisons have become graduate schools in anti-Zionism. They don't pay attention to what's going on there. And one after another of the major Palestinian leaders, for example, Yahya Sinwar, are graduates of that graduate school. The Israelis are not paying attention to the Palestinians who are in their complete control. They're not paying attention to the schools under their control, not the media, not the arts, not the politics. They're just not paying attention to the Palestinians. They're paying attention to faraway peoples who are important, no question, but not as important as the Palestinians. Palestinians are changing, and the Israelis are not aware of it.
Now, many would say that ending the war without eliminating Hamas teaches every enemy that kidnapping Israelis works. You agree with that assessment?
Oh, yeah, sure, no question. I mean, not that the problem started with October 7th. It goes back decades. The Hezbollah, Hamas, have made a specialty of kidnapping Israelis and benefiting from it, yeah.
Now, you've called Zionism's greatest mistake that belief that generosity, enrichment, and concessions will eventually produce Arab acceptance. Why do you think Israel continues to make the same mistake?
I think it's deep in the Zionist psychology. I like to note that Theodor Herzl, the great intellectual of Zionism, wrote a novel. It came out in German in 1902 called The Old New Land, Alt Neue Land. And it's a story about his notion of what a Zionist state would look like. And there's one Muslim in it, a landowner. And this Muslim landowner, Rashid Bey, is just delighted with the Zionists because the Zionists are bringing more commerce. They're building roads and deepening harbors and bringing electricity. And he couldn't be more happy with them. And this fantasy, this Zionist fantasy, that the enemy, the Palestinians, will appreciate what they're doing if they benefit economically, if they benefit in other ways, continues to this day. Century and a quarter later. Shimon Peres, New Middle East, was based on that. Indeed, the funding of Hamas through Israel under Prime Ministers Olmert and Netanyahu was premised on the same idea. Give them money and they'll build better schools, have nicer cars and better homes and lose their fervor. But that's not how things work. Money tends to aggravate and incite rather than diminish people's ambitions. I mean, the greatest empires were not founded by poor people; they were founded by rich people. So it's not a uniquely Israeli problem. I mean, look at Donald Trump thinking that benefiting the Iranians would bring them over and end the problem with Iran. J.D. Vance, in particular, made this argument. Get them some money and there'll be no more problem. But it is a particularly Israeli problem. The historic pattern is to deny economic benefits to your enemy. Think of the medieval city siege. You stop everything from going in and out. You make them starve, and that's the way you defeat them. That's the class. I mean, think of the boycott and other provisions against, say, Cuba or North Korea. You make life difficult for them. But that's not how the Israelis work. The Israelis believe that you enrich your enemy, you benefit your enemy, and your enemy will thank you and stop making war against you. I'm afraid 100 and more years have shown that's not the case, but the Israelis continue with this illusion.
Now, you say that Israel is highly competent against external enemies such as Iran and Hezbollah, but remarkably incompetent, like we said, when dealing with Palestinians. Why does the same country behave so differently on those two different fronts?
Yeah, it's as though there are two different security establishments, one brilliant and one inept. But even on the inept one, there is tactical excellence. It's just a strategic ineptitude. Somehow or other, the Israelis understand, say, Iran, that you need to take out the nuclear infrastructure. But they don't understand the Palestinians. They just don't understand the Palestinians. And this, as I say, goes back the whole way to the beginning of Zionism in the 1880s. It's a bit of a mystery.
Mhm. Now, you argue that Israel has spent decades trying to persuade Americans and Europeans while barely attempting to influence Palestinians, like you said. So, why do you think Israel is focused on the audience with less power to end the conflict?
I think there's a general sense in the Israeli security establishment that the Palestinians are irredeemable. There's a sense of lions and hyenas. Lions and hyenas have always been fighting, always will fight. And the Palestinians and Israelis are hyenas and lions. And they've always been fighting, which isn't the case, but 150 years worth. And they always will fight. And so there's no real effort. There's a giving up ahead of time. That's the sense I get. There's no point. These people are hopeless, which I think is very wrong. These people are not hopeless. You can see a real change taking place.
Now, you mentioned a new Hasbara, which would target Palestinian schools, mosques, media, prisons, political culture. Maybe you can explain what that is?
I'm advocating that the Israeli government and other institutions should focus on the various institutions you just mentioned in order to sway Palestinian even more. It's already moving, but it can move more, it must move more. And so the shortest version of my book is minimal violence and maximal messaging. I do not think that violence is the way forward. Yeah, you have to use violence when you have to, but it's not the way to win the war. For Israel to win the war is through messaging, through convincing Palestinians the gig is up, you've lost, and look, there's something better. Not by appeasing them, not being nice to them. So, for example, let me tell you what I had hoped for after October 7th. Indeed, on the very day of October 7th, I had an article come out in which I said, this is a tragedy, but it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity for Israel to take control of Gaza, total control, dominate it, and then to hire Palestinian Gazans to form the security services, the administration, and to actually govern in Gaza. So the Israelis would have a chance to fix the error that they made in 1967, where they didn't really take control, and this time really take control, and run an administration that, as I put it, would be comparable to those in neighboring states, such as Egypt and Jordan. Tough, authoritarian states where you better not mess. But if you don't mess, you can have a perfectly fine life. So I'm not advocating democracy. I'm not advocating kumbaya. I was advocating that the Israelis sponsor a tough regime, one in keeping with other regimes of the neighborhood. And then eventually, if things work, it can become more democratic. That's what we see as the pattern. The tough regimes democratize. You don't go right to democracy. You need decades to go in that direction, step by step. First dog catcher, and then municipal council, and so forth. You can move towards democracy, but first you have to establish, a tough, uncompromising regime. That's what I was hoping for. And indeed, Prime Minister Netanyahu articulated that very same notion in March of 2024, but nothing much came of it. And then Donald Trump butted in and came up with his Board of Peace and who knows what, and all that has gone by the side.
Now, where does Islam play in all of this? We know that they don't really have peace with infidels and things like that. How does this go hand in hand?
Well, Islam is a big, complicated subject. In theory, Muslims must not have permanent peaceable relations with non-Muslims. But in practice, you do see permanent peaceable relations with non-Muslims. You don't see the Muslim world at war. You don't see the states of the Muslim world all at war with the non-Muslims. No, you see some. The Islamists among them, those who are trying to apply Islamic law, the Sharia, in its full version. But most Muslim states have come to terms with reality, whether it be domestic or external, and are not trying to implement Sharia in its completeness. So, yes, the possibility of Islamists taking over and a country turning into Afghanistan or Somalia does exist, but for the most part, that is a rarity. And for the most part, Muslim states do have normal relations with their non-Muslim neighbors and counterparts.
But do you agree that Hamas's fight is mainly a religious fight, or is there more to that?
Yeah, I agree. The war against Israel has taken various different ideological forms. The one that's most apparent now is the Islamist. Prior to that, it was the Palestinian nationalist. The idea that Palestine is a state and Palestinian nationalism, being Palestinian. Hamas doesn't particularly focus on that. It talks about Islam. Prior to that, it was Arab nationalism. It's not Palestinians, it's Arabs who are out to destroy Israel. And before that, it was Greater Syria. It's somewhat forgotten, but Greater Syria is a very powerful notion, the idea that Palestine or Israel is part of a Greater Syria. I wrote a whole book on this. So you have four different iterations: Greater Syria, Pan-Arabism, Palestinian nationalism, and now Islamism. Who knows what might come next? So the ideology changes, but the goal remains the same, which is to prevent an Israeli state emerging or to destroy it once it has emerged.
Mhm. Now, you argue that conflict has never fundamentally been about borders. What is the clearest proof that creating different borders would not resolve the situation?
Well, the Israelis have over and over again retreated. They retreated in 1949 from Sinai. That didn't end the war with Egypt. They retreated in 1973 not 1973, 1979 from Sinai a second time. That did, for the time being, end the war with Egypt, but hostility in Egypt remains very high. They retreated in 1994 and subsequently from Gaza and parts of the West Bank. It didn't help. They retreated in 2000 from Lebanon. That didn't help. Every Israeli retreat has led to an increase in hostility. That the other side, Arab, Palestinian, has concluded the Israelis are on the run. Let's go after them.
Yeah. And specifically 2005 when they left the Gaza area. So Palestinians lack Israel's military and economic power, yet you say that they possess an extraordinary international narrative. How do you think that they became such great publicists, much greater than Israel?
Yeah, I like to quip that who would have guessed a century ago that Arabs would be the great publicists and Israeli and Jews the great warriors? It's not what you'd have expected. The Palestinians particularly developed a worldwide network in the early 90s as a result of a number of factors that took place then, including the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union, the formation of a single Europe under the EU, the Oslo Accords, and in particular, the election of Nelson Mandela as president of South Africa. So South Africa, which had been the bête noire of the left, was no longer an issue, and Israel became the bête noire. So the Palestinians had significant support in 1990, but it increased enormously in the course of that decade, as symbolized by the Durban Conference of 2000, ironically in South Africa, when Israel became this focus of leftist outrage. And it just keeps growing. I mean, look at primaries in the United States now. I mean, Israel is arguably the single most emotional, or anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, is arguably the single most emotional issue in democratic politics in the United States. Unbelievable, but it is.
Even amongst the Republicans now, who would have thought?
Yeah, but it's different. It's kind of cranky weirdos on the far right who I doubt will go very far. I don't think Tucker Carlson and his ilk have a great future in the Republican Party. Indeed, Tucker Carlson has announced he's starting his own party. No, conservatives are basically friendly to Israel, and the further you go to the left, you see more and more hostility. It's become virtually linear, and it's become extremely central and emotional. I mean, you have candidates like Zohran Mamdani, who's running for mayor of New York and making anti-Zionism a central plank of his platform. Excuse me? I thought mayors deal with sanitation and potholes. Well, no, anti-Zionism.
No. What do you think are some mistakes that Israel makes when explaining itself to the world?
Uh, the Israelis are, I don't know what to say. They're hopeless. They just don't know how to present themselves. They've put more money and energy into this than in the past, but they're always behind the curve. It is the enemies of Israel who come up with the slogans, who come up with the arguments, who mobilize, and the Israelis are always behind the curve. If I describe it to anything, it would be that, actions speak louder than words. If you build it, that's what counts. If you make things happen, it's the Zionist ethos, that's what counts, not fancy language.
Mhm. Now, you distinguish classical anti Semitism from anti Zionism, even while acknowledging that they often merge. At what exact point does opposition to Israel become hatred of Jews?
Yeah, this is an important point. The Israeli Declaration of Independence in 1948 mentioned specifically protecting diaspora Jewry. And indeed, over the decades, coming to the aid of diaspora Jewry in matters large and small, whether it be helping Ethiopian Jews or Syrian Jews escape their hostile homelands, or helping European Jews with regulations against kosher. Israel was always there. I believe that's now changed. And it might have something to do with the fact that there are now more Jews in Israel than in the rest of the world. But the Israeli leadership no longer pays attention in the way it used to the welfare of diaspora Jews. And it takes actions that are inimical to the interests of diaspora Jews who are being pummeled. In some cases, violence, like the Bondi Beach murders in December 2025. In other ways, politically, it mentioned all these far-left candidates in the United States, but likewise in other Western countries. And the Israeli government has shown indifference to this. It does not particularly care about what its actions are doing to harm diaspora Jewry. And so I've advocated that diaspora Jewry get tough with Israel and say, you got to pay attention to our interests too. We want a seat at the table, not literally, but have a voice in decisions and be able to say, no, this could be very harmful to diaspora Jewry. The Israeli government of recent years has just not paid attention, and diaspora Jewry is politically and in terms of violence paying the price.
Now, you say that Islamism peaked around 2012 or 2013 and has been declining internationally ever since. We have October 7th, Taliban, ISIS, Islamist influence in the West can appear to suggest the opposite. What are people missing?
Well, I did make this point about Islamism in the home countries, in the historic Muslim countries, not in the West. And yes, of course, Ahmed Shara has taken over in Syria and other developments. But I think the broad trend points to Muslims becoming more disaffected from Islamism over the past now 13, 14 years. Polling shows this, voting shows this, anecdotes show this. Muslims are more skeptical. More Muslims have lived under Islamist control. They haven't liked it. And you find that especially in countries under Islamist control, there's a real disaffection. There's a real move away from Islam. This is most obvious and well known in the case of Iran, where the mosques are empty, where there's a serious movement towards Christianity. To convert, for an Iranian to convert from Islam to Christianity, it's joining the other team. It's a kind of betrayal in the eyes of the government. It is a dangerous undertaking, and yet something on the order of 500,000 to 1 million Iranians, something on the order of 1% of Iranians have done this. Remarkable. In Turkey, which is less stringent in its Islamism than Iran, you see a move towards deism of the sort like the founding fathers of the United States. Yeah, there's a God, but no particular characteristics, and not particularly Islamic. You see Erdogan, who's been in control these 25 years, frustrated that his vision of a pious generation has not turned out. So these are the kind of trends I'm pointing to, that especially clear in countries under Islamist control, but also in those where it's not. Under, for example, in Egypt, there's a real move away from Islamism, a rejection of Islamism. In Saudi Arabia, there's a distinct move towards atheism in Saudi Arabia, going from one extreme to the other. So it's worth watching.
Mhm. Now, obviously, you distinguish between Islam and Islamism. Why do Western governments so often recognize Islamists as the authentic representative of Islam while marginalizing reformers, dissidents, former Muslims?
Yeah, it's very frustrating. Well, the Islamists claim with some authority that they are the real Muslims. They're the ones implementing the Sharia, the Islamic law, and they're the authentic Muslims. And there tends to be an ahistorical view among non-Muslims. Yeah, this is Islam. This is the way it's always been. And yeah, these are the authentic Muslims. Many years of argument have not succeeded in changing that basic disposition. Though increasingly, I'm happy to say, one does see among politicians, intellectuals who have now lived with this issue for a long time, that there is a willingness to make this distinction, though not everyone. I mean, one member of the House said he prefers dogs to Muslims. Another said he wants no Muslims in the United States. You find these outrageous statements being made at this late date. It's dismaying, and it's extraordinarily counterproductive because it undercuts, as you just pointed out, the dissidents, the reformers, the ex-Muslims, and marginalizes them. And in some fundamental way, it doubts them and says, well, you're either pretending or you're not a real Muslim, you have no voice, no real authority. Whereas, in fact, they are the hope for the future. It is the anti-Islamist Muslims who will, one day, we hope, move Islam away from Islamism and make it a moderate and modern religion. Religions are constantly evolving, constantly adapting to modern circumstances. I'd like to note that 500 years ago, all of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam endorsed some form of enforced labor, of some form of servitude, slavery. And yet, in Judaism and Christianity, these are completely gone. There's no argument whatsoever for it. I mean, in the United States, we had a huge civil war that dealt centrally with this issue. But in Islam, it's an alive issue, and there are Muslims who believe that slavery is not only legitimate, but if you don't, there was one Saudi figure who said, if you don't believe in slavery, you're not a real Muslim. Well, Islam has some catching up to do. And it's the reform Muslims who can push it in the modern direction.
Now, you warned about lawful Islamism using elections, courts, education, civil rights, language rather than terrorism. Is that now a greater threat to the West than violent jihadism?
I believe violence has been pretty much contained. Yeah, there is the occasional episode, but nothing very large, nothing very threatening. And instead, you have the emergence of quasi-Islamists like Ilhan Omar and Zohran Mamdani and who knows, Abdus Said in Michigan perhaps, who are not exactly full-fledged Islamists, but who are sympathetic to the Islamist program, rising in American politics, House of Representatives, potentially the Senate. Lawful Islamism is far more dangerous at this point than criminal Islamism.
How would we be able to combat the Muslim Brotherhood, for example, in the West? In many Arab countries, they are banned, but it seems like they take advantage of our democracy.
Well, let me start by saying that the Muslim Brotherhood is just one of many, of perhaps 7 different strains of Islamism in the West. There's Deobandism, there's Khomeiniism, and so forth. So let's call it Islamism, not Muslim Brotherhood. Again, your question? I got distracted.
How would
By that
we be
point.
able to combat them in the West when they're using our democracies the way that
Oh,
it's can be used?
through education, through understanding. Same way we dealt with fascism and communism, by understanding these threats and dealing with them. The education has been rather slow. If one starts with 9/11 as the point when Islamism really made its mark on the United States, it's not gone very well. The slogan after that was "United we stand." Well, no, united we do not stand. And in particular, the Democrats, and especially the left-wing Democrats, the socialist Democrats, embracing Islamism. So it's not going very well.
Do you think that Turkey, under Erdogan's leadership, can become a big danger for Israel in the future with the way his rhetoric and things like
Oh, I think it already is. Military, potentially. In Syria, recent news has Erdogan likely to get F-35 fighter planes and enhanced F-15s. Yes, I've always thought that Erdogan, who is much more clever than Khomeini or Khamenei, is a greater threat, not just to Israel, but specifically to Israel, indeed. He has a real economy. He has a real military. He's a member of NATO. He plays the game intelligently. He doesn't go around screaming death to America and death to Israel. He is much more clever, and presumably his successor will be also much more clever. So yes, Turkey presents Israel with its greatest danger. Once the nuclear threat from Iran is ended, no question, Turkey is the greatest danger to Israel. And by
that?
the way, it's worth noting that it's Iran and Turkey, not Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. It's no longer the Arab states. The Arab states fought Israel for 25 years, from 1948 to 1973. They've been gone for 53 years. The Arab states talk, but they don't do anything. It is the Turks and the Iranians who were missing in action in the early 25 years, but are now the threats to Israel.
No. You think that President Trump is aware of this? And if he is aware, is it not a priority for him? Because we see him posing up to Erdogan, also the Syrian leader, Qatar. What are your thoughts on that?
Mr. Trump is a transactional president. Ideas matter not at all to him.
Okay. You've said that Netanyahu should leave after 3 decades in and out of power. What failure ultimately convinced you that this era must end?
I met him in 1983. We're 1 month apart in age. I was a big fan of his, wrote a glowing article about his coming to office in 1996. Over the past 30 years, I've become increasingly dismayed. And the central dismay has been that he's interested in power more than anything else. He showed in his first term back in 96 to 99 that his convictions went out the window if he could stay in power. And while it got better after 2009 when he returned to office, it then became clear that power was what he... To me, the great crisis in Israel is the Haredim. The Haredim are not part of the economy, are not part of the military, are not part of the public life. And integrating them is crucial. And yet, in order for short-term gain, Benjamin Netanyahu has done whatever he needed to do to keep the Haredim on his side. And I think that's a terrible mistake. That is in the longer term. There are many others, but that to me is the most central. The Haredim need to be integrated, and the Netanyahu-led government is doing everything it can to give the Haredim the money and the privileges they want in order to get their votes.
I want to ask you one last question, a personal question. After nearly 50 years studying Israel, Islamism, the Middle East, what do you understand today that the younger Daniel Pipes would have found hardest to believe? What have you learned
It's
in
actually
these
more than
decades?
50 years. I got into this field in 1969, so 57 years. Yeah. What did I learn? Well, many things, but perhaps the most striking, I wrote a book in 1983 called In the Path of God, which was about Islamism, what was called the rise of fundamentalist Islam, surge of fundamentalist Islam back then. And it looked to me to be one whole. And today, over the past 40-some years, it's become clear how differentiated it is. You have, say, the Gulen movement of Turkey at one extreme, and you have ISIS or Shabab at the other extreme. There's enormous variation there. And although I find it distasteful to admit, it is possible that the very most moderate versions of Islamism could evolve into something positive. I draw the analogy with Dubček and socialism with a human face in Czechoslovakia in 1968. It was possible for communism to go in a direction that would have been okay. I think it's possible for some versions of Islamism to go in a direction that would be okay. It hasn't happened. I don't know if it's likely to happen, but there is this range of Islamism that wasn't apparent to me back when I got started.
Dr. Pipes, thank you so much for your time. It's definitely gained a lot from this conversation. How can people follow you, purchase your books, anything you'd like to plug?
Well, thank you for
More
the
than welcome
barrage
to.
of knowledgeable and intelligent questions. I'm not always getting those. You've clearly done your homework, so thank you for that. Well, it's
Thank you.
simple. My website, danielpipes.org. Basically, everything is available for free except for, and including some of my books, but other books you can find how to purchase them there. But it's my archive of thousands of articles and thousands of blogs and book reviews and so forth. All for free.
Wow. Okay. Amazing. Thank you
Thank
again.
you. Same to
Wishing
you.
you all the best.